Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we'll be showing from this year's Norway chess. It is not the classical section just yet. Before the classical section we have one full day of Blitz games, and this is a very special game from round 2. And it's a very special game because Magnus Carlsen is facing Gukesh, the youngest player ever to have defeated Magnus Carlsen, and today is his 17th birthday. So it's always weird when you play someone on your birthday. You either have a great birthday or you have a terrible one, and even World Chess Championships have been played on certain players' birthdays, and they have lost to those games. So it's a crazy game. It's a crazy opening. Let's check out what happened, and will Gukesh have a happy birthday or not? So Magnus has the white pieces, and he opens with pawn to b3. He goes for the Nimzo Larsen attack. We have pawn to e5, bishop to b2, knight to c6, and now the immediate pawn to c4. We have pawn to d5, captures, and now knight to c3, just attacking the queen. All very standard stuff. We have queen to e6 and now knight to f3. We have bishop to d7, and already we move into new territory. There is a game where pawn to e4 was played, but here Magnus plays pawn to e3, and it is now already as of move 7 that we have a completely new game. So here we have castles by Gukesh, goes for a queenside castles, and Magnus prepares kingside castles. He plays bishop to e2, pawn to f5, and now castles kingside. And now, of course, you know what's coming. Magnus will be attacking on the queen side, and Gukesh will be attacking on the king side. So pawn to e4, chasing away the knight, knight to g5, attacking the queen, and now queen back to e8. We have pawn to f4 by Magnus, now cementing that knight on g5, but of course he is just baiting pawn to h6. So pawn to h6, knight to h3, and now knight to f6. We have rook to c1 now, nicely aligning the rook with the king on c8, so of course a nice prophylactic king to b8 by Gukesh. Pawn to a3, preparing pawn to b4, and now bishop to e6, putting pressure on the b3 pawn. Pawn to b4 by Magnus, and now queen to d7, putting pressure on that d2 pawn, but Magnus just defends it with knight to b1. So if you look at Magnus's knights, it seems like he's just, horsing around, not really doing good work. But he actually does have a plan. The knight here is very nicely defending the d2 pawn. There's no way to do anything in the center. Magnus just wants to push on the queen side, and this knight, later on, it can even go, for example, to f2, to h1, to g3, and then to put pressure on the f5 pawn. So here, knight to e7, we have bishop to e5 by Magnus, already threatening the c7 pawn, and knight f to d5 by Gukesh. We have bishop to c4, and now king to a8, sidestepping this diagonal, queen to b3, and now b5 here is actually a beautiful move. It looks like something you don't want to play because it opens up your king, but it's great. It just completely stops white's attack. Not a move you spot in Blitz. So instead we have knight to c6 here, putting pressure on the bishop, and bishop back to b2 by Magnus. We have rook to g8 now, preparing to push on the king side. Pawn to g5 is coming, and knight to c3. We have pawn to g5, and the bishop captures on d5. We have bishop captures, queen captures on d5, and Magnus trades off everything as he needs to stop that kingside attack. So captures, and just rook to c2. He has to defend the d2 pawn. Pawn to g4, knight to f2, and pawn to a5. Pawn to a5 by Gukesh, putting pressure on that b4 pawn. B captures on a5, and rook captures on a5. And now just rook to a1, as you need to defend that a3 pawn. We have bishop to g7, offering a trade of bishops, and Magnus obliges. Bishop captures, rook captures, and now knight to h1. And now what we've discussed, that Magnus wasn't just horsing around. He actually does have a plan for this knight. The f5 pawn is the back of the pawn chain. It's going to be a weak pawn, and the Magnus will put a knight on g3 to attack it. So rook to d7, and now knight to g3 with king to b8, bringing the king into the game. Rook 8 to a2, doubling up on the second rank to add more the defense to that d2 pawn. Knight to d8, and now king to f2. Magnus brings the king into the game. We have knight to e6, and now king to e2. Pawn to c6, and now pawn to a4. We have king to c6, and now rook a to b2. Rook d to d5, doubling up on the fifth rank, and now rook to b4. We have knight to c5 now, putting pressure on the a4 pawn, and rook c to b2. by Magnus. Now he says, all right, if you want, you can capture on a4, but Gukesh does not capture right away. It's perfectly fine to capture. There's no reason not to do it. It's just that it's Blitz. He probably trusted Magnus. Rook to a2, adding a defender to the pawn, and now knight to d3. Now this is a beautiful knight, and it's one of those knights that you do not want to have next to your king. Rook back to b1, and now pawn to b5 by Gukesh, and Magnus now has to advance his pawn, otherwise he would lose the rook on a2. So pawn to a5, but now Gukesh will just win it. Pawn to b4, the knight nicely defends it, and now the pawn is attacked twice. Pawn to a6, and now king to b6. Gukesh will now be winning that past a pawn. Rook b to a1. Magnus defends, but the problem is rook to b5. We have king to d1, but now just pawn to b3. Rook to a3 and pawn to b2, and now Magnus has to abandon the a file with his rook. Rook to b1, and now Gukesh just wins a pawn. Rook captures on a6, rook captures with check, king captures, and now knight to e2. King to a5, can Gukesh now grab the full point here? Knight to d4 attacks the rook and the pawn, and now rook to b6. Here, Gukesh again trusts Magnus. King to a4, and it's game over. Magnus can just resign here. If you capture the pawn, there's no defense against rook c5. Attacks the knight and threatens rook to c1. So it would be completely winning. However, rook to b6 was played, and now Magnus gets his king closer into the action. King to c2. Now king a4, again very strong. Gukesh starts advancing the c pawn, so pawn to c5. Knight captures on f5, and now rook to b4. We have knight to d6 and king to b6. Preparing to kick away the knight here. Knight captures on e4, and now pawn to c4. So all of a sudden, it is Magnus who is up a pawn, even though Gukesh beautifully won that past a pawn. Knight to c3. Of course, getting the knight to a beautiful square here. Now you might even put the knight to d1 to go after the pawn, or knight to d5 check will be very nice. So king to c5, stopping that, and now pawn to f5. Magnus starts advancing his past f pawn. King to d6, we have pawn to f6, king to e6, and now just rook to f1, putting the rook behind the passed pawn. Rook to b7, guarding the f7 square, so you can just advance it, and now knight to e4. Now again threatening knight to c5 check if the knight from d3 ever moves. So rook to a7, getting rid of those ideas and preparing rook to a1. Pawn to f7, Magnus just trades everything off. Rook captures on f7, rook captures, we have king captures, and knight to d6 check. He will win the c4 pawn. So king to e6, knight captures on c4, removes the defender of the knight on d3, and now you have to move it and lose the b2 pawn. But luckily, Gukesh has knight to e1 check, and he also wins the g2 pawn. So king captures on b2, we have knight captures on g2, and now king to c3. So Magnus is up a pawn. He's going to start pushing his central pawns, and Gukesh will win the h2 pawn and start advancing his king side pawns. But still, for the moment, he's down a pawn. Knight to e1, pawn to d4. Pawn to d4. Magnus starts advancing. Knight to f3, and now pawn to e4 with h5. We have pawn to d5 with check. King to e7, and now king to d3. We have pawn to h4. King to e3, and now knight captures on h2. And it's equal material. Magnus has the two central pawns, and Gukesh has the two outside pass pawns. So pawn to e5, g3, and now knight to d2. Here, d6 check is the way to go. Magnus played knight to d2, and now Gukesh can win the game, actually. Pawn to h3 was played. We have knight to f3, and now knight to g4 check. This is winning for Gukesh, but it takes a lot to win. The other check, knight to f1 check, is winning on the spot, because after king to e2, there's no defense h2, and you can't stop h1. Even if you capture, let's say you capture here h1 queen, king to e2, you even queen the other pawn. So there's really nothing to discuss here. However, it's Blitz. They were both like on 5 seconds on the clock. With increment, knight to g4 check was played. King f4, and now pawn to h2. Now Magnus played king captures on g4, on g3, h1 queen. Gukesh promotes his pawn to a queen, and now king captures on g4 was played, but the PGN was broken at the time I used it for my interface. So a couple of weird moves will be played now. Queen f1, king captures on g4, but the position that arises will be the same after d6 check. King d7, knight to g5, queen h2 check, king f5, and now queen to h5. So here we continue. King to f4, Magnus on pin. So now Of course, Gukesh has to be careful. Queen to g6, knight to f3, and now queen to f7 with check. King to e4, queen to h7 with check, king to f4. We have queen to f7 with check and king to e4. Now, this is objectively winning for Gukesh, but he's down to some 5 seconds on the clock constantly, and Magnus is shifting between 10 seconds on the clock and 15 seconds on the clock. So, I mean, you have to be very careful. It's very easy to run into a fork here. So, queen to c4 with check, knight to d4 blocking this, and now queen to b4. We have king to d5, queen to b7 with check, king to c5, and now queen to e4. And here finally Magnus advances the pawn to e6 as the knight nicely defends it. King to c8 here, again Magnus some 15 seconds on the clock, Gukesh 5 seconds, and king to c8 is the correct move. King, if you go to d8 it's a draw, if you go to e8 you have to fight for a draw, but c8 still winning for Gukesh. Pawn to d7 with check, king to c7, and now knight to b5 check. Again, you have to go to d8, you have to stop the pawn from advancing to e7 at all cost, and now knight back to d4. Magnus just defends everything, and he says, all right, you either lose on time or you find a way to win this. However, queen to e5 check was played, king to c4, and now queen to d6, and here Magnus couldn't find a move. He played pawn to e7 with check, and he played it fairly quickly. It just wasn't enough. The problem is, okay, if you capture with the queen on e7, then knight to c6 check wins the queen. If you capture on on e7 with the king, then knight to f5 check wins the queen. However, Gukesh just played king captures on d7, and here Magnus just had a good laugh. He shook Gukesh's hand, and he congratulated him on this wonderful victory that took only 94 moves. So that's a grueling game for Blitz, especially since Gukesh played like 40 of his last moves with 5 seconds on the clock. That is absolutely incredible. So I even have a photo of it, of the moment. Let me just check real quickly. I might have it. There's a chance I have it. So let me just quickly check. Yeah, there you go. It was a fine moment. There you have it. Magnus very, very, very happy, and Gukesh also happy that he won, but Magnus very happy that he experienced this game. So it's not like, I lost, I'm super sad. No, he was totally okay with it. But yeah, very nicely done. Gukesh wins a game against Magnus Carlsen on his 17th birthday. So I mean, what more could you ask for? I'm very happy for him, and hope he does well in the rest of the tournament. That's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a really wild one, and we're gonna cover some more. If you have any suggestions, always use hashtag suggestion. That way, it's much easier for me to check out what's been going on. And then, of course, we are proceeding into the classical segment of the Norway Chess 2023. Once again, really hope you enjoyed it. Very nicely done by Gukesh. It was a really wild game. I would like to thank golfsoftware.com, Marcus Grebel, an anonymous person, MK1, and Buntiak Punk for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. Really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of this wonderful event until it finishes. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.